In the shadow of the towering pillars of the Capitol, where the voices of the powerful often echo through the marble halls, there lies a story that cuts to the heart of the American nation. It is a story of a system that, in its pursuit of wealth and power, ignored the cries of the very people it was supposed to serve. In the summer of 1861, as the guns of Fort Sumter still smoked, a quiet rebellion began, one that would reshape the nation and challenge the very foundations of its society. This was not a rebellion of arms, but of labor, a general strike that would mark a turning point in the history of the United States. The South, with its vast plantations and sprawling fields, was built on the backs of enslaved African Americans. The cotton, tobacco, and sugar that flowed from these lands fueled the economies of both the North and the South, but the cost was borne by the millions of men, women, and children who were treated as property rather than human beings. The planters, the elite few who owned these plantations, held sway over the region, their power unchecked and their wealth seemingly unassailable. But beneath this veneer of prosperity, a different reality was brewing. The Southern economy was a house of cards, built on a foundation of forced labor and racial oppression. The planters, while amassing vast fortunes, were blind to the economic and moral rot that was consuming their society. They clung to the idea that their system was not only sustainable but morally just, a natural order ordained by God. They pointed to the Bible, to the differences in skin color, and to the supposed inferiority of the African race as justification for their actions. But this was a delusion, a convenient myth that allowed them to ignore the suffering and exploitation that were the true pillars of their wealth. The North, with its growing industrial might and free labor system, presented a stark contrast. While the South clung to its agrarian past, the North was hurtling toward the future, driven by innovation and the promise of a better life for all. This growing divide between the two regions set the stage for the conflict that would soon engulf the nation. The North saw the Southern system as a moral and economic anachronism, a relic of a bygone era that had no place in a modern, progressive society. The South, in turn, viewed the North as a threat to its way of life, a force that sought to dismantle the very foundations of its society. But the true catalyst for change came not from the halls of power or the battlefields, but from the fields and plantations themselves. It was the enslaved people, the very individuals who were supposed to be content in their natural condition, who would become the agents of their own liberation. As the Civil War raged, these men and women began to take matters into their own hands, refusing to work, fleeing to Union lines, and joining the fight against their former masters. This was the General Strike, a mass movement of resistance that would deal a mortal blow to the institution of slavery. The planters, initially confident in their ability to maintain control, were caught off guard by the scale and intensity of the resistance. They had long believed that the enslaved people were content, that they were treated well, and that their system was beneficial for all. But the truth was that the enslaved people were acutely aware of their condition and were desperate for freedom. They saw the Union soldiers as liberators, as a means to escape the bonds of slavery and begin a new life. The planters' attempts to suppress this movement, through violence and intimidation, only served to galvanize the resistance and drive more people to join the cause. The impact of this general strike was profound. It disrupted the Southern economy, hobbling the Confederacy's ability to wage war. It provided a steady stream of labor and intelligence to the Union, weakening the Confederate war effort from within. And perhaps most importantly, it demonstrated that the enslaved people were not the docile, contented beings that the planters claimed. They were a people with agency, with the will to fight for their freedom, and with the capacity to organize and resist. The planters, faced with the collapse of their system, were forced to confront the reality of their situation. The ethical and moral arguments they had long used to justify slavery were crumbling, and the economic arguments were no longer sustainable. The war, which they had entered with confidence, was turning against them, and the general strike was a key factor in their defeat. The end of the war and the abolition of slavery marked the end of the planter class as a dominant force in the South. The once powerful families who had ruled the region for generations were reduced to poverty, their plantations destroyed, their wealth gone. But the end of slavery did not solve all the problems of the South. The region was left to rebuild, to grapple with the aftermath of war and the challenges of a new social order. The freedmen, now free but with little in the way of resources or support, faced a new set of challenges. The Reconstruction period, while marked by some progress, was also a time of violence, oppression, and resistance. The legacy of slavery and the general strike would continue to shape the South for generations to come. In the end, the general strike was a turning point in American history. It was a moment when the enslaved people of the South, through their collective action, changed the course of the nation. It was a moment that exposed the lies and the injustices of the Southern system, and it was a moment that laid the groundwork for a new and more just society. The planters may have been defeated, but their legacy of racial oppression and economic exploitation would take many more years to fully overcome. The story of the general strike is a reminder that change is possible, but it requires the courage and determination of the oppressed to fight for their freedom. In the end, the South was never the same again. The planters, with their grandiose dreams of a slaveholding empire, had been swept away by the tide of history. The enslaved people, once voiceless and invisible, had found their voice and their power. The nation, scarred by the wounds of war, began the long and difficult journey toward a more perfect union. But the memory of the general strike, the quiet rebellion that changed the course of history, remains a testament to the enduring power of human resistance and the unquenchable desire for freedom.